Well, good evening, everybody. My name is David Goldblatt. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here, great pleasure to see you. And this evening, the subject is Hillsborough, 20 years on. 20 years isn't actually a very long time, it strikes me, to try and heal the wounds and deal with the aftermath of such an extraordinary trauma and such an extraordinary set of losses for the people involved. And one of the most important things that strikes me about an evening like this is simply the act of remembering. I suspect that there will never be a complete truth, and I suspect there will never be complete justice for the victims and their families. And the very least that we can do in the face of that is to bear testament to the event and to continue to remember and to argue the story as we understand it. It also strikes me that the lessons and the memory of Hillsborough retain direct relevance in all sorts of ways to the world of football and beyond. Only 3 weeks ago in Côte d'Ivoire, during a World Cup qualifying game, another 19 football fans perished in a suffocating crush in a football stadium. And although nothing on the scale of Hillsborough has reoccurred in Britain since 1989, in a rough calculation that I did from my own knowledge, I would say at least 1,000 football fans have died in the last 20 years in crushes, fires, in football stadiums across the world. It also struck me, reading the reports of the G20 demonstration and the behaviour of the police force to those demonstrators, that the issue of how our police force treats its citizens remains a very live issue. I've been asked just to begin this evening by giving a little bit of context. Looking round the room, some of you will certainly be old enough to have been present or to have seen Hillsborough on the television. Some of you may not. Clearly, there were all sorts of individuals who were deeply culpable on the day. My intention is not so much to go over the ground of individual culpability, but just to sketch a bit of the context in which a series of disastrous and in the end fatal decisions were made by those in power. The context of the 1980s and football is above all the era of Thatcherism, in which football fans became bundled up with the other enemies of the state, the enemy within, as they were known, from the miners to other trade unionists, to all forms of working class and radical opposition in the 1980s. And this is an era, you may recall, in which the government was on the verge of introducing an ID card scheme in an attempt to take control of football stadiums. But more telling, I think, than the machinations of the Thatcher government was the state of the football infrastructure and the perspective within which football was viewed by the police and indeed by the football authorities itself. It's worth remembering, I think, that on the day of the Hillsborough disaster, the trouble really began in a courtyard outside of the stadium. Around 10 to 15,000 Liverpool fans, many arriving late because of traffic problems, not budgeted for, I should say, by the police on the day, were attempting to enter a stadium through a set of turnstiles that had been installed in 1927. And there were 7 turnstiles to handle something in the region of 6,000 to 10,000 football fans in the space of perhaps 20 minutes. That in itself is emblematic of the derelict and disgraceful state into which British football stadiums had descended by 1989, along with much of the rest of the country's infrastructure. In that courtyard, prior to the crush, there was enormous pressure of fans arriving late, desperate to get in to see the semi-final. And once again, it's an indicator to me of how football fans were perceived by the authorities that the crush that was already building up in front of these turnstiles, in which men, women and children were in a state of visible discomfort, was handled by the police by sending in mounted police officers on horseback. And I just want you to think for a moment what an extraordinary situation it is when a desperate crush that is emerging is handled by sending police officers on horses, big horses, into the midst of it. As you might imagine, that simply made matters worse, and finally the order was given to open a gate to the side of those turnstiles, through which the now desperate crowd poured. And they poured into the stand at Hillsborough, and there were 3 pens into which they could have gone. And that in itself is an extraordinary thing, that not merely was there fencing in front of the at the front of the stand, separating fans from the pitch, but the stand itself was divided into 3 pens with wire on either side. It is hard not to think that the way in which football fans, paying customers, citizens of this country were treated was at best as cattle and at worst as wild beasts. More extraordinary, perhaps, even than that, is that from today's perspective, where every football ground is absolutely full to the gills with yellow-coated stewards asking us to sit down and stop swearing, that no one was standing in front of that tunnel and could have indicated to the crowd that was about to pour through that they could have gone to either side of the central pen where the main crush happened. The police officer in charge on the day, as you may know, had never taken control of a major football game in his life. And that, again, is an indicator of the disregard and, I would say, almost the contempt with which football fans had been held. And when one recognises the depth and the scale of that contempt amongst the authorities responsible for citizen safety, it is hardly surprising, though no less shocking to think, or no less shocking that the events that then transpired, the failure to unlock the gates, the failure to perceive the crush as a crush rather than, as it was by many police officers at the time, as a incident once again of trouble at a football ground, the failure to allow ambulances into the stadium, the failure to stop the game early, and most shockingly of all, I think, for me, recalling the day on the television, was the sight of police officers forming up in a defensive cordon across the halfway line before even the gates in the fences had been opened, as if they were awaiting some attack or storming of the pitch by a group of people who were slowly dying in those pens. So, although many individuals and many decisions taken on the day were deeply culpable and deeply wrong, it remains the case that they were taken in the context of a contempt and a disregard for citizen safety. That is alarming, and it strikes me as not entirely past. To discuss it in more detail and to bear witness and testament to the events of 1989, we have 2 speakers this evening. Daniel Bennett from Bristol Radical History Group, who was present at Hillsborough on the day in one of the stands along the side of the pitch, and Sheila Coleman, who has been working for the last 20 years for the Hillsborough Justice Campaign. We're going to take a short talk from each of them, and then I very much hope that all of you will feel able to contribute your own recollections and your own opinions of the day. As I said, I don't expect there is going to be very much justice in the end for the victims of Hillsborough and their family, but there is a responsibility on all of us on a day like today to do the best we can to bear testament and to bear witness to that day and to their memories. Daniel.
I am a lawyer by trade, but I'm not here this evening to talk about the law and the legal struggles involved. I've had some sporadic involvement over the last 20 years in little bits of the campaign, but nothing compared to that which Sheila's been involved in, so I'm going to leave all those issues to her. What I'm going to do tonight is firstly give my witness evidence as to what happened, what I saw, which principally concerns what happens after 3:15, the cut-off points. And then I'm going to read a statement from the ambulance man, Tony Edwards, the one who went into the ground, which again involves events after 3:15. 3:15 is significant because that's the date the coroner decided that everyone was dead, and therefore there was no point after 3:15 investigating what happened. On 15th April 1989, I attended the Liverpool-Notts Forest game at Hillsborough with my brother and his friend Peter. We arrived in Sheffield at around 1:30 and got into the ground relatively early, I think about 2:20. We had seats in the main stand to the left of the Leppings Lane end. Our seats were about halfway up the stand and about halfway between the Leppings Lane end and the halfway line. Accordingly, we had a very clear view of events. By 2:45, I could clearly see that the middle section of the Leppings Lane ends was overfull with people and that the two side sections were empty. It was clear at this stage that action was needed to move people to the side sections. I discussed this at the time with my brother and with his friend Pete, and it was also a general topic of conversation all around us. It was clear to everyone. I've been attending football matches regularly since I was 6, and I was well aware of how a full standing section looked. It was clear that the middle two sections, the Leppings Lane end, was overfull. Sat around us were many people who we recognised from regular attendance at Anfield's main stand. They had also been aware of how full the ends should have looked and how full it did look. By 3 o'clock it was already clear that people were injured. A boy aged about 15 years old was wandering alongside the touchline before the game started. His arm was broken at right angles, both below and above his elbow, forming a Z shape. He reached the halfway line before stewards led him away. Fans were trying to climb out of the middle section of the end over the front railings before the game started and over the sides. Fans from the stand above were pulling people up from the back. This was occurring in large numbers, not just the occasional person. Policemen were standing by the railings trying to prevent people from climbing over. I could clearly see that policemen were pushing people back into the stands. Even from where I was sitting, you could see that many people were in a lot of difficulty. At 3:04, the game was stopped by the referee. The police had by then realised that many people were injured and stopped trying to push people back into the stands. However, they did not appear to be doing anything to help. Their main actions were aimed at pushing people off the pitch and preventing anyone from progressing down the pitch. As time passed, the number of fans on the pitch increased and the numbers of injured and dead people increased. Before I left the ground, I witnessed the following actions by the police. First, they attempted to prevent fans from removing the goal structure. This was necessary because injured fans were falling on top of other injured fans as they escaped the Leppings Lane end. I could see that it was impossible to treat anyone because the space between the goal and the railings was very confined. Eventually, the sheer number of fans overwhelmed the few police presence, and the goal was removed and placed out the way by the fans. Second, there was a gate at the front of the Leppings Lane end which was locked. It was eventually opened, but within seconds a group of policemen forced the gate closed in the faces of the fans. Presumably they considered too many people were on the pitch. The gate was later reopened and some policemen helped carrying fans out. However, by this time the majority of police had withdrawn to the halfway line where they formed a security cordon. The vast majority of rescue and resuscitation attempt was made by fans who had escaped uninjured and fans who had left the main stands to assist. I saw very few police doing anything to assist. When an ambulance finally arrived at the ground, which I think was about 3:20, it entered at the Notts Forest end through a gate slightly wider than a single ambulance. As the ambulance approached the gate, a policeman stepped in front of it and stopped it from progressing onto the pitch. We commented to each other that we still could not believe that the police were more concerned over protecting the grass than rescuing people. Injured people then needed to be carried the length of the pitch to reach the ambulances outside. There appeared to be only 3 or 4 stretchers available. Fans started to dismantle advertising hoardings to use as stretchers. Police ran across to stop them. Again, there was a confrontation between the fans and the police. Sheer weight of numbers of fans forced the police back. Many other fans then started likewise dismantling advertising hoardings, and soon the ball boys also ran onto the pitch to do likewise. As injured fans and advertising hoardings were being carried out the length of the pitch by other fans, they had to cross the police cordon on the halfway line. To start with, the police would stop each group to check. I don't know what they were checking. We commented to each other that we still could not believe that the police were treating this as a crowd control exercise, and that somehow the fans were faking taking someone to an ambulance so as to reach the Notts Forest end. I should add that by this time I counted at least 10 bodies covered in coats, with limp limbs hanging by their side on advertising hoardings. It was clear that these fans had died. Later, the police tended to allow most stretchers pass without stopping them. However, they would still occasionally stop a group of fans and check. I did not see more than a couple of policemen actually helping injured fans. The few that did so stopped shortly afterwards and withdrew to the halfway security cordon. Someone sat close to me had been counting the bodies that appeared to be dead. He was counting those bodies carried on stretchers or advertising hoardings where a coat or something similar had been draped over the body. By the time he had reached 42, we decided that we should leave. I noted that it was half time, so we left the ground. The other thing I wanted to read to you, I said I'm just going to concentrate on witness evidence today, is a statement from the ambulanceman Tony Edwards. He was the only ambulance attendant to make it onto the pitch. He's given some press interviews for, I think, the first time in the past couple of weeks, and I've put this together from his press interviews. He stated that we had no idea what we were going to. We started the day picking up patients for transfer to hospital. We were then diverted to Hillsborough when it came over our radio that there had been 1 fatality at the stadium, and we didn't think anything of it. It might just have been a heart attack or something. As we were guided in, I could see other ambulances arriving. A police officer said, "You can't go on the pitch, they're still fighting." My boss reached into the cab, switched on our horns and said, "Drive onto that pitch and don't stop till you reach the far end." The first thing we saw was a group of Liverpool fans running towards us carrying an advertising hoarding, the type you see around the edge of the stadium. They were using it like a stretcher. There was a body on it, a big heavy guy, and he had his t-shirt pulled over his face. I thought, that guy's dead. Then we noticed the police had put a cordon halfway up the pitch, but there was a gap in it. It was through this gap that more groups of fans were running. They were banging on the sides of the van, shouting at us to stop, but we were told not to stop until we reached the far end, so we kept going. I still remember how the sound changed when we drove through that cordon. When the ambulance came to a halt at the 18-yard line, Tony stepped out, this is the driver, this is the ambulanceman, with a mask and bag resuscitation kit. The driver stayed in the ambulance. As I got out of the vehicle, we were swamped by desperate fans begging for help with their gravely injured friends or relatives. A woman came up to me and said she'd been resuscitating someone. I kept looking at the pitch to see if other ambulances were coming. I was taken with the woman, and the other people were shouting at me for oxygen, for a doctor, for a defibrillator. There was a huge amount of demands and massive confusion. I kept looking to see if someone else was coming. I was not expecting to be the incident officer. Clearly this was a major incident, and clearly no one was fighting. I saw 4 people on billboards on their backs. If there had been trained people about, these people would have been put in the recovery position. All I was looking for was the other ambulance crews. I knew I couldn't handle this on my own. I tried to call for help on the radios, but the radios didn't work. Bodies lay all around, and frantic fans grabbed at me, pleading for help. I searched for signs for someone who could be saved. I was trying to choose people I thought we could help. I saw a man doing CPR on a young girl. I said, "Let's get her." By the time I got to the ambulance, I looked down, and it was a different girl. We'd taken the wrong one. In the ambulance, I had Victoria Hicks and Trevor Hicks trying to resuscitate his daughter. There was a Nottingham lady trying to save someone else's life. There was a body by my legs, and a policeman was holding some oxygen. We had 3 people in the ambulance, which normally takes at best 1. I was standing over a body I couldn't attend to. I then said that we had to get off the pitch to get to hospital. The ambulance was so full of bodies I had to pull out. but no other ambulances replaced my vehicle. None of the people I took from the pitch that day survived. Why were the 42 other ambulances kept off the pitch? Why was I the only ambulanceman on the pitch? I don't believe these questions have been answered properly, even after 20 years. People have been dishonest. I feel sorry that there were people who were perfectly savable, but they weren't getting any priority. Most of the ambulances were parked by the gym, but not coming through onto the pitch. 80 trained ambulance men. I always thought I'd be interviewed for the Taylor inquiry, but I later found out I wasn't because of the ruling that everyone was dead by 3:15 p.m. I don't agree with that, and it should be challenged. It was a convenient time, but what if they weren't dead? What if crews had been on the pitch with proper equipment? It's nonsense. It's professional arrogance. You wouldn't know how many dead there were if crews didn't get inside the perimeter fence. When we got off the pitch, I knew there were people there that still needed to be helped. That's all I wanted to say about what's happened at the grounds. Does anyone else want to speak about what happened before we talk to, before Sheila talks about her involvement? Okay, that's something we can come back to later. Sheila.
Thanks. Both David and Daniel have really set in context how the disaster occurred, and it really succinctly put as well. And I think the comments David made are comments I've made very often over the years, because even to families, a lot of the families saw Hillsborough in isolation. They just didn't see the politics of how those things happened, and the reference, and really what Daniel has just described, that's what happens when people are treated like animals. Because as David pointed out, the whole thing around how fans were treated, it was even within police instructions. Visiting fans were corralled from the station to the ground and put into pens. They were herded into pens like animals. My involvement in Hillsborough came about, one, because I'm from Liverpool, and like everybody on that day, I didn't lose anyone at Hillsborough, and I wasn't at Hillsborough, but I can remember where I was when I found out something was happening there, and I had friends and family who were there, and I can remember waiting and listening for messages, and listening to the roll call the next day on the radio of people's names being read out, waiting for names I knew, glad when they weren't read out, and then feeling guilty because those names, they were someone's sons, daughters, etc. For a time, Liverpool at that time reacted quite swiftly in terms of, as an authority, believe it or not, the City Council actually set up a disaster working party. In the City Council at that time, what you had was the remnants of any rebelliousness in the city. So you had an independent Labour group, and quite a few of them had been at Hillsborough, and they set up this disaster working party, and I assisted them in a voluntary capacity. And then I was employed as an academic researcher on what was known as the Hillsborough Project, and my role was to monitor all the legal proceedings. So I spent a lot of time in Sheffield and attended all the inquests, and right from the word go, I had a sense that something was wrong, not just from the time of, we knew it was lies, what was being told in the Sun and the defamatory headlines, but when I started my research, what I came face to face with was authority, and how people in authority lie to your face. And I've always had great difficulty with people lying to me from I was a child, and kind of I got the bit between my teeth on that one, and 20 years on I'm still around in one form or another. But to just take you briefly through it, after the deaths, the inquests were opened and adjourned, as is normal for bodies to be released. And normally what would happen, the inquest would stay adjourned until the DPP had decided whether any prosecutions would arise out of the disaster or not. In this case, what happened was the coroner brought about these what became known as mini inquests, and what that was, a limited phase of the inquest just to release evidence as to where the person was when they were in the pen, where they were in the pen, what time they'd left home, etc., etc. And it was argued that was to help the families. Well, no way was it to help the families. What it did actually was set the scene, because, and I was there firsthand, and we saw it from the first day on. What happened was, in each and every case, a pathologist read out the name, age of each person and the blood alcohol level of that individual. And so that brings you to the point of of victim blaming, because at that time 95 people had died. Tony Bland was still in a persistent vegetative state, so we say 96, but at that point it was 95. So you had the obscene situation of blood alcohol level being read out against a 10-year-old boy who died. And they, that was the level it got to. So you see the creation of a scene being set in which, along with what David has said, was, how football supporters, what was the makeup of football supporters? And really, when you set it in context, football supporters generally were seen within the context of violence and of unruliness generally, and hence why they were being used to bring in ID cards under Thatcher. And Liverpool generally at that time had a very negative reputation. It had a reputation for militancy, which I think it's quite a conservative place, to be honest. That's another story. But it did have this reputation, so you had that together, Liverpool football supporters, and they were Liverpool fans. And so, what else do? You try and create the scene that somehow they were complicit in their own deaths, or their fellow fans were responsible for the deaths, and so hence the lies and the headlines in the early days. And then the blood alcohol levels. Now, for what it's worth, the blood alcohol levels in many were 0, or and in some they were above the level for driving. Who was driving? If you took the blood alcohol level in theatre goers, what's it going to be? These people had gone to a sporting event, a social event, and they were somehow being considered complicit in their own deaths. So that set the scene, and really the evidence given, and this was very clear, and this brings in the lawyers acting for the families, because one of my big criticisms of the whole Hillsborough thing is the poor quality of representation by the Hillsborough Steering Committee of Solicitors. It was set up, and they just fell short of ambulance chasing, but in some instances they did knock on doors 2 days after and were getting people to sign pieces of paper. I was speaking with Joan Tootle, who lost her son just the other week, and we were talking about how she said she didn't know what she was doing, and the next thing she was getting letters off this guy saying, "I'm representing you." Then she remembered signing this piece of paper. She thought someone had just come to pay the respects about her son dying. So they had agreed, the solicitors representing the families had agreed that these inquests would take place in this limited phase, and that no evidence would be challenged. So you had the bizarre situation: you'd be sitting in court, the solicitor representing the families would be sitting there. This contentious stuff was coming one way, but couldn't be challenged. And it was horrendous. And to take one example, where slightly contentious stuff was challenged, was around quite a high-profile case. It became high-profile, Kevin Williams, because there was evidence. The police, in a throwaway comment, said, someone said he spoke at 4 o'clock. And very quickly, they got onto the fact that, someone's going to pick up on this. So that was the Wednesday. The Thursday, the investigating officers, and I'll come on to the West Midlands Police in a minute, they went to, ironically enough, the two key witnesses were both police officers, one a Merseyside police officer who was attending the game as a supporter, and the other was a South Yorkshire special constable, who both had evidence that this boy was alive on the pitch and then was alive in the gymnasium. And the West Midlands Police visited both of them in their homes and exerted tremendous pressure on them to alter their statements. By the Friday, the coroner had brought in an expert to give evidence that the boy couldn't possibly have been alive. And if any movement was seen, it was nerve endings, no way was he twitching. It was something that had occurred after brain death, etc. And it was a case of blinding you with science, as subsequently found out having meetings with other pathologists. So that set the scene for the lies, really, but in a naive jury, but also a Sheffield jury that had been influenced, no two ways about it, by the press. You'd be hard pushed not to be influenced, given the coverage in Sheffield was pretty bad. And that's not a slur on anyway on the people of Sheffield, because in the main, the support they gave families on the day and subsequently was amazing. The press was pretty harsh, but a scene was set for the jury. And then what happened was, and it is crucial to this, after the disaster, South Yorkshire Police, as is, the norm, had to bring in another police force, ask another police force to investigate what had gone on. So they invited West Midlands Police in, and a few years earlier, West Midlands Police had invited South Yorkshire Police in to investigate them at another stage. So you see how it all works. But basically, the West Midlands Police were to become the investigating force for all the inquiries into Hillsborough. They investigated South Yorkshire Police. They were the coroner's officers. They provided the evidence for the coroner, and they provided the evidence for the Director of Public Prosecutions. So you had the notorious West Midlands Police Force, some of whom were former members of the now or then disbanded Serious Crime Squad. And in fact, a head of the Serious Crime Squad played a pivotal role at the inquests. And he was so dirty. I mean, the stuff on him. Questions had been asked in the House of Commons prior to Hillsborough about this particular officer because of a case where he had set someone up and they'd spent 18 months in Winson Green prison. And this officer, I can remember being rung up where I worked, and it was this officer, and he said to me, Stanley Beachy was the guy's name if you want to check him out, but this is the guy, and he said to me, I'm just ringing up to ask you, are you thinking of coming to Sheffield tomorrow? I'd never spoken to the man, so I said, of course I'll be there. And he said, well, it's just a courtesy call to tell you don't bother because you won't be allowed in. And I said, I won't be allowed into Sheffield or to the inquest. And he said, just don't come. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll come and you can tell me to my face. And so I was with families, and then he backed down and I went in. But that was the level of, you were getting this intimidation. When I was in Sheffield, I saw I was being singled out because I was sort of aside from families, although I knew them. And I was followed around Sheffield a lot by West Midlands Police. My home was broken into twice in Liverpool, and the only things taken was to frighten you. There was things that if there'd been someone wanting easy money, they could have sold, but stuff was address book was taken, etc. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But the point in that was this discredited police force headed up the inquiry into Hillsborough. And I've said, and I make no bones about it, I think they were brought in because of their expertise. And their expertise was cover-up and fabricating evidence. And they did a good job. They exerted great pressure on witnesses, credible witnesses, witnesses, withstanding. So when it came to the final phase of the inquest, because the DPP then ruled no prosecutions, insufficient evidence. Any questions the families asked their solicitor, challenge this. At the mini inquest, they were told no. Wait till the final inquest, then we'll have our say, then we'll go for them. And of course, the final inquests just were generic in nature. The inquests were dealt with as if there were one inquest. And the coroner imposed the now famous 3:15 cut-off time. His argument was, in line with what Daniel said, was, we just use that time as a marker. It's as good a time as any. It's more or less the time the first ambulance arrived on the pitch, which was 17 minutes past 3, I think. But he said it's as good a time as any. Everyone would have been dead. or if they weren't dead, they would have sustained the injuries and were beyond saving at that time. So they effectively ruled out any investigation into the emergency response within the coroner's court, which could have affected the verdict. It certainly could have brought in a verdict which incorporated lack of care into the verdict. So there was gaping holes in the evidence given, and a lot of medics who were at the ground as supporters, John Ashton, who at that time was Professor of Public Health at Liverpool University and then World Health Organisation, he gave evidence to the Taylor inquiry, and he was very scathing of the emergency response, of the ambulance response specifically, and said there was no triage at all. And he was criticised at Taylor. Taylor more or less said he wasn't a proper doctor because he didn't work in a hospital then. And then he was, because of the 3:15 cut-off, his evidence wasn't even heard. So, and there were other medical personnel whose evidence never got to the coroner. And so you had the bizarre situation at the final stage of the inquest where families, I always remember this, being in Manchester at a business meeting, this is what they used to call them, for the inquest, and being with the steering committee and the barristers to see if they wanted, if the families were going to, choose them to represent them. And I remember the chair of the steering committee saying, well, you get what you pay for. If you want Rolls-Royce representation, you've got to pay for it. And basically, what families did was pay for that, and someone said they got a clapped out old Mini as in terms of the representation. Each family paid £3,500. They could pay that because people's generosity in the disaster fund, which when people got money, that money just went in legal fees, and basically they got appalling representation, and people were disregarded. One woman I mentioned before, Joan Tootle, her son Peter had died, and her husband, also called Peter, I was with him every day at the inquest, attended every day, never heard his son's name mentioned once. So people were paying for that level of representation, and there was just nothing about their individual child or husband. And it really was appalling, and a few times I said to families, you need to go for judicial review on this point or that point. And they'd listen to me, and then they'd go to the people representing them, and they'd say, no, leave it till the end, put all your eggs in one basket. And they were paying for that representation, so you can't criticise them for taking that opinion. And what happened after that was when the accidental death verdicts came out, they then went back to the lawyers, and the lawyers said, nothing we can do, basically. And the money had run out by that stage, and it was appalling. The sounds that will stay with me forevermore, and the sound in the courtroom when they brought in the accidental death verdict still moves me tremendously, and individual mothers, I can still hear it in my head. And what happened was Daniel knows the family, John Glover's wife, Teresa, was taken out the court because she was screaming, and the coroner adjourned, and she just passed out in the corridor, and they came to us and they said, get her off that corridor, she's a fire risk, and dragged us, and I remember dragging her and one of her sons and me, dragging her into this little ante-room. And then when we went back in, the coroner then finally said, if there's any noise at all, whatever. And I always remember, and it's just this defiance, that just is what I love about some of these people, is probably one of the most, sort of this retired school teacher. She was never going to rock any boats. She was never going to stand up and shout about anything, my whole perception of her. And as the coroner said, and there will be silence as the coroner walks out of court, and he walks down, and she just kicked off singing You'll Never Walk Alone. And I'd never expected it from this woman, and it was just amazing. And she had a real school mom warbling voice, and it was just so moving, because what she must have felt to do that, because this woman would, she wasn't about that, but she'd been sort of taken to that extreme. And families were like, where'd you go from here? And I was party to being involved with 6 families, and through people I knew, and was able to get advice for free and stuff, and got 6 families for judicial review of the inquest verdict. And we spent a week in the High Court. We were successful in getting leave, and went to the High Court, and it got kicked out after a week. We knew after the first day we were getting nowhere. One of the judges sat literally like this, you know, sort of scratching his head, eyes closed half the time. And in his final summation, as you know, to why we got nowhere, referred to the semi-final between Liverpool and Sheffield Wednesday. So, you know, and you got that level of ignorance, you know, where does it get you? And so I'm skipping loads because, you know, I'm trying to condense 20 years, and please stop me if I'm going on a little bit too long. But from my point of view, from working on a project which did the first critical analysis of Hillsborough, and we published several pieces of work, I left that project because I had difficulty with equating in and a living out of the work I was doing. I had a real ethical dilemma. It was, I was meant to do a PhD out of it. So I think there's probably about 3 people now walking around with PhDs that should be mine because the work just went elsewhere, but you know, I still sleep at night. And I went back to, I left the project for lots of reasons, because I was being pulled away. Because I was unearthing the contentious stuff, I was being dragged away and told to come and sit behind a desk and write whatever, and you know, you're getting too involved and don't be too critical of the police and don't do this, don't that. And the project I was supposed to be I was working on was supposed to be radical, and this is, you know, so just don't get me on left-wing academics, you know, because it's an industry. So I left and went back to another job, also in academia, I have to, but and continued doing this voluntary and working with families. And at that time, the group that the main organised group was the Hillsborough Family Support Group, which had been set up after the disaster and was made up of families who'd lost people at Hillsborough. A lot of those families felt that survivors should be involved, because obviously the role they had, not only were they victims of the day, but also they had crucial evidence. But that wasn't to be, and over time what you got with Hillsborough was, like anything else, a disaster occurs, there's a commonality. Those people who've lost people, they come together and they mourn collectively because of that common incident. But over time, differences emerge. People were different in so many ways, politically, class become a real thing. I saw such divisions of how people were treated, depending on their accent and depending on the postcode, and really awful things I saw. And over time, really big differences emerged, and the group I'm involved with, the Justice Campaign, I have to say that I tried, the bereaved families that formed our group, I argued against them breaking away from the main group, and I said, if you want to change something, you know, you just, and I was basically, you know, just have a go at changing it from within. You're saying, you know, it's just committee-led and no one has the right to, you know, you say something, it's ignored, whatever. Just try and change it, try and, you know, sort of get your views across, get on the committee, whatever. But it just couldn't be, and if I can just give you, and this isn't meant as a, you know, obviously I do have criticisms of individuals within that group, but just to give you the one example and the turning point at which our families walked away was, it was suggested that the family support group meet with the son and discuss with the son, and some of the families, the hierarchy, and I say hierarchy because that was what it became, argued, well, it's a, you know, it's a big selling newspaper and it's got lots of money behind, and maybe it could help us fight for justice. So you can imagine the responses of people like Dave Church and people that you knew, Daniel. And basically, it went to they put it to the vote, and the vote went in the favour of those who didn't want to speak to the son. And so the chair of the family support group said, okay, well, I as chair won't speak to the son, but me as a father, I'm going to speak to them and you won't stop us. So the committee met with the Sun newspaper, and that was the point at which families went, can't take any more, and formed this group to be a more proactive group that incorporated survivors and people like myself who support the issue of fighting for justice. And that's basically why there's two groups. So we're a much broader church, and what's happened over the years of the existence of the Justice Campaign is that, and this is what I've become aware of, is the confidence that a lot of survivors have gained from feeling that they've got a voice. Firstly, a lot of survivors, and it still distresses me because I still come across people who feel guilty because they're alive. They don't even acknowledge their heroism, because if it wasn't for the heroic acts of those supporters on the day, the death toll would have been much greater than 96. Make no bones about that. They got out the pens, and some of them were physically injured themselves, and they were ripping down hoardings, pushing through police. A guy, a journalist I spoke with the other week, said that he was told he was ripping hoardings down, he got out the pen, and the police stopped him and said, there's no excuse for vandalism, I don't care what's going on, stop them. You know, and it does so much of it becomes laughable, because you just go, it's a parallel universe there, that, you know, survivors were seeing this, football was seeing this, and you touched on it, it's crowd control versus crowd safety. And what I would say, tying in with that, is in terms of not seeing those signs of distress, I went to the Hillsborough ground when the jury went, when I was at the inquest, and so we had a look around. I was with one of the bereaved fathers, and I was on the Leppings Lane terrace, and he was in the control box, and then he came down to me and he went, just go up there and look at what you can see with the naked eye, and then ask them to zoom in, you know, with the monitor. It was very clear to make out characteristics with the human eye. With a zoom, you could make out the colour of people's eyes. The idea that someone couldn't see distress in those pens is, you know, it's so telling. The argument is that Duckenfield, the main guy, wasn't even in the box at the time, the control box. The videotapes went missing, you know, at the time as well. But basically, people... the whole context in which it happened was around just pushing people back into pens. When the gate onto the perimeter fence, when the gate burst open and fans burst out because of the pressure, they were pushed back in. And I've been in court and seen police officers, I've been in the inquest and seen police officers stand up and say, yes, I pushed them back in. Now that says either, you know, I don't know how they're trained, that you can't see that distress, or to ignore that distress. I find it so distressing that is who we're policed by. So basically, you were getting the arrogance of people being able to give that kind of evidence in front of families and show no. And I was always one to see, people are going to be distressed when they come to terms with what they've done. No way. I then subsequently watched the two major officers, Duckenfield and Murray, at the private prosecutions in Leeds. I didn't support the private prosecutions. I thought they were a waste of time because they were never going to get anywhere. And I have to say, you know, I'm sure if any of you are in court, I'm sure you'd like to go into court with a cast iron guarantee that if you're found guilty, you'll not go to prison. Those officers went into that in court, the court in Leeds, with a guarantee, and this was for lawyers acting for the family support group, that they didn't necessarily want them to go to prison. If they were found guilty, they didn't want them to get a custodial sentence. It wasn't discussed with other families. So you see all the time, I mean, basically what you've got to buying off exercises all along the line. And, you know, this is commonplace, isn't it? There's always people who have the price, and then thankfully there's some of us that don't have a price. So I watched those two officers, though, in Leeds. I attended there, and in terms of, you know, our civil rights, this group, we had a tremendous time. We were threatened with imprisonment if we launched our website. And we held back on launching the website the day before I think it was the 10th anniversary, or the 11th. Whatever anniversary it was, I was sitting in Leeds High Court with John Glover, Dave Church, and a survivor, myself, and we were threatened with imprisonment because of our website. All it does is tell the truth. So we held off launching it until after the cases had had finished, and then it was the server pulled it, and now we host it abroad. But basically what I'm saying is the attempts to kind of control anyone who was getting near to the truth of Hillsborough. And over the years, every avenue is closed. The Labour Party, when it was in opposition, said that if it got into power, it would call for there would be a new inquiry. Jack Straw, in particular, said there would be a new inquiry. So when the Labour government got in, what occurred was not an inquiry, it was Lord Justice Stuart Smith, and it was the Stuart Smith scrutiny, more commonly known in Liverpool as the Stuart Smith stitch-up, because what happened was basically we went to him, and he started off on the first day by saying to the secretary of the family support group, Phil Hammond, oh, hello, Mr. Hammond. Are the rest of your committee with you, or are they like the Liverpool fans arriving late on the day? Yeah. And that's well documented, that. And he actually, I think it's on camera, that as well.
He's admitted it.
Yeah. And because he apologised, he had to apologise.
Should add as well, just because I know this for a fact, that Lord Justice Stuart Smith, even at that time, was known as the most right-wing judge in Britain, and for Jack Straw to select him for that job was with the knowledge of exactly what he was going to do, and that he'd already for 5-10 years played that role in the Court of Appeal for the government, that whenever they wanted a right-wing decision in a contentious case, he would sit in it as the chair.
But the scrutiny as well, there was no power behind it anyway. There was no real power. It wasn't a public inquiry. And so we all went to him painstakingly with evidence like Tony Edwards, the ambulance officer, other evidence. And we sat there, I remember being with Dave and Maureen Church, and we gave this evidence to him. Now, the best thing about this for me is he didn't ignore the evidence, because we were brought down to the House of Commons, because it was going to be announced in the House. Jack Smith invited us down. Ominously, we met in room 13 in the House. And he said, we've listened to what you've said, and we've taken on board what you've said. In fact, we've written it, yes, police did change statements. Here's a copy of a statement before. Here's a copy after it's been altered. And this, I just think, was part and parcel of, sort of how we live now. It was the whole setting of that tone, because he went, but there's nothing we're going to do about it, because it wouldn't make any difference anyway. But what it did make a difference, because it closed another legal avenue. So, because then they'd say, oh, but you've had another inquiry. They kept trying to say that was an inquiry. And so it just leaves people with nowhere to go. Anne Williams, who lost her son Kevin, has gone back to the Attorney General on numerous occasions, asking for the inquest verdict to be quashed, because the evidence in Kevin's case is overwhelming that he was alive after 3:15. The policewoman says she carried him into the gymnasium, which was the temporary mortuary, and he opened his eyes and said, "Mum," and that was 4 o'clock. Now you imagine as a mother having to live with that. That police officer who gave that, she didn't give that evidence. She made a statement to that effect. She was bullied and browbeat by the West Midlands police. I mean, we found that officer. That was the only reason. We found her. We found the other police officer. She's never given that evidence in open court. So you have to ask why. And so all the time, doors are closing. I mean, Anne the case went to Europe and was dismissed just a month ago. The argument being it was out of time. She should have gone just after the Lord Justice Stuart Smith's scrutiny. So to take it up just to the 20th anniversary and last week, what you had in Liverpool was it was like it was yesterday. It was just, it was so tangible. It was like Hillsborough happened yesterday. But anyway, the memorial, the ground was just packed, and I don't think Liverpool had really allowed for that. There was some criticism actually of how people got in there and stuff. But anyway, as you know, or you probably know, Andy Burnham came onto the pitch, and no one knew none of us knew he was going to be there. He didn't go there unannounced. He went there because he had been invited, and but there lies another story. But anyway, people started to listen to him, but the minute he said, I'm here on behalf of Gordon Brown, the government, on behalf of the government, whatever, it was amazing. I mean, we spoke about it before, and I've watched it over and over again. It was just, do you call it de-individuation, when a group acts as an individual, and just, you know, and it was amazing, because there was this anger, and there was this, you know, don't come here unless you're going to do something, because we, you know, sympathy is useless. People don't want sympathy. They've had 20 years of it. You know, if you, and especially when people are in a position when they could do something. And I was asked, when he made comments the other month about, oh, if there was any new evidence, we'd consider it. I was asked in an interview, well, have you got any new evidence, you know, that he could consider? And I said, there doesn't need to be new evidence. All he has to do is go away and order an inquiry into evidence after 3:15 on the day of the disaster. That's never been heard in open court, that evidence. So when he came last Wednesday, you know, he had to take it on the chin, because, you know, you get 32,000 people shouting you down. And not, you know, but it was so powerful, because you can imagine the mix within that group in terms of their politics. You know, everything about them, there'd be huge differences. What they had going for them was, they weren't all Liverpool supporters. There were people from everywhere there, and I know that because of you know, people who came from abroad. But just right across, people were shouting for justice. Now, on the back of that, people were saying, there's been all this stuff in the press at the weekend about Jackie Smith asking the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire to release papers, and for the 30-year ruling to be relaxed, etc. And everyone was getting a bit excited yesterday, and people were ringing me up, and I just said, well, I can't get excited about this. For one, I don't know that it's true, but secondly, I can't get excited about evidence which is held by South Yorkshire Police, which has been gathered by West Midlands Police, that they've had 20 years to go through. I can't get excited about that evidence being released, because it's been doctored from day one. Videos went missing the day of the disaster. The cover-up began on the day of the disaster. I said, I can only begin to get excited if there was an independent inquiry where those issues will be heard. And you know, I agree entirely. There will not be justice, and that sounds terrible from me, from the Hillsborough Justice campaign. That doesn't mean to say you don't campaign for it, you don't argue for it, you keep chipping away. But there's a shift here. I feel there's a shift, and I think there's going to be a buying off exercise somewhere along the line. And I might be wrong, but I just feel something's going to come, something will give. And before I came here tonight, I actually got a phone call off the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire. I was in BCFM, is it? Yeah? The radio, yeah. And I got a phone call after I'd done the interview there, but I know he'd been trying to get me all day. And he said, his name is Merid Hughes, and I thought he said he was Med News. You know, the news station, like... in your, and I was like, sort of just got into like saying, oh yeah, what do you want and everything, and then I realised he was the Chief Constable, and I said, oh, I thought you were a journalist, whatever. But anyway, basically he rang me because he, from on behalf of the campaign, he rang me basically to say he's sick of being misquoted in the press, and Jackie Smith has never contacted him at all. So all this stuff in the press yesterday wasn't true anyway. And basically, what he said several weeks ago was there's more than 300 boxes of evidence in the archives in South Yorkshire Police, and he wanted them to be looked through and see what legally he could release. That's as much as he said. And he said the first contact he had with Jackie Smith was this morning when he rang her to say, what's all this about you telling me about releasing this stuff? So basically he said, and not to do him a disservice, I've still got it on there. I was going up on the back of Don't Buy the Sun thing like that. He said that his background is he's a public order specialist, and you know, he wasn't involved in Hillsborough at the time and whatever. And over 300 boxes, which he would release legally anything that he could. And he said he's not interested in any cover-up, and he thinks probably there'd be things in there that neither side would like to hear. And he said he rang Jackie Smith, and one of the bases he rang her was, he said, he can't deploy men to look through those and what could be released. He needs money offer to look through them. So I volunteered my services free of charge. But he declined. He said, thank you for the offer and nice try. Yeah. I meant it as well. I'd be more than happy to stay. But, you know, the reality, so there you have it. The reality is there's these boxes which have been, you know, gathered in this way that I've explained. And before they get to the families or the families' representatives, the police are going to go through them again to see what they can see and can't see. So you see all the time, that's why there's never going to be any justice, you know. And all you can hope for is that you're public about all this, I think, because what I've noticed over Hillsborough is that, you know, I speak with survivors and families who, they'd argue they had no politics, and they did read The Sun before Hillsborough. And, you know, like, I mean, you didn't read The Sun before Hillsborough for loads of reasons that had nothing to do, you know, with Hillsborough. But lots of these did read it, and they read it for the sport and whatever. And, you know, we've run a boycott of The Sun since 1989. And you look at the sales of The Sun on Merseyside. The Sun have made so many attempts to get into us and, you know, try and make amends. And it is a success story, that boycott. But basically, I've seen the politicisation of so many people through this, and in a way that's the only heartening thing for me is when they begin to understand other struggles, because I come from Liverpool. Historically, it's a very sectarian city. Where my background is Irish Catholic. I grew up on a dividing line, and, you know, we still have 12th of July Orange Lodge marches. So I come from that kind of city where you will only get that in Glasgow and in the 6 counties. I've seen people sort of go beyond that now in terms of how they see other people's injustices. Yeah.
These people are explaining what they have to dealt with the police, after disaster. You know what I mean?
But police will say we're police, we do what we want.
Well, it's the authority, but it's against the support, and like they were saying, you know what I mean, Liverpool at that time, you know what I mean, did have a bit of a name, but the thing is, we've always been a great follower of Liverpool anyway. It doesn't matter.
That's one side of the argument, though, isn't it? They've amplified. They take the minimal, they take the minority view, and they make that say that the 2% disruption is something becomes 90%.
Sure.
Well, to try and cloud the issue over about most people are actually peaceful.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to use politicalisation of current affairs, basically.
Yeah.
They're using any event as a kind of a battering ram.
Yeah.
Basically to shout people down.
Really, basically. I hope I haven't interrupted.
No, thank you.
I appreciate that. I'll give them a good kick in myself.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I'm actually going to put my mate on the spot here in a minute. And sit over there. But one of the things when I'm involved in a radical history group, but when we were talking about this a few months ago about Hillsborough, and I've heard more things in the last week which have been very interesting things that have been said by people on phone-ins. But this thing that Dave's on about the policing. Me and Dick were at a game, and we're West Ham United fans. We were at a game at Upton Park in 1981 against Chelsea, and we saw a fair bit of trouble at games over the years. But the most frightening experience I ever had, probably just about I drowned once. That was pretty bad, but nearly died. But this is probably about the second worst thing that's happened to my life, and that was at a West Ham United Chelsea game. And do you want to say what happened?
Queuing to get into the North Bank of West Ham, I remember a lot of people trying to get in, and the police just setting a line of horses to clear the area, and I ended up probably 3 people under me with your feet off the ground in a position like that, and you look around and I was with him or with 3 other friends, and you're holding yourself up and you've got people under you and there's heads under them as well, and you're outside the ground and they're moving people on, and they just kept coming forward, and it was just people who were pulling.
You've got no control.
We were trapped against a load of turnstiles that had been shut, so there was the West Upton Park was full, and there was thousands of us outside, and we were trapped, completely trapped. Very similar situation, luckily outside the ground, not through some bloody tunnel or something. But we, by the walls up to, you know, up to we go around to the North Bank, a trap there, and they were sending horses in.
Yeah.
And I never understood to this day what, and we're all West Ham, there's no trouble. I've never understood to this day why they are charging horses into the crowd who are trapped. Because all it did was, and that's the closest I've been to dying at a
Just
football match.
well, just in with what when David was talking before about the policing of it, and the inept guy in charge, that has to be set in context to Merseyside police officers who had policed at Hillsborough, you know, because they always send a local contingent anywhere, don't they, with visiting teams, and they referred to the previous year because it was a rerun of the previous year's game, and this guy was saying to me that what normally happened, because when you went down, as you got into that compound and you went down the pen, if you didn't know the ground, there was this central tunnel, and that was where you'd head for. You didn't know there was there and there, you see. And what happened was, in previous years, was they'd put a couple of police officers at the end of the tunnel to go that way or that way because these central pens are full. And that normally happened, and it didn't happen that year. And what we found out was the guy who normally policed the Hillsborough ground was Superintendent Mole. And what had happened was, previously, a rookie cop was called out to an incident in a park, and when he got to the park, he had a gun put to his head, and basically, you know, really panicked. And it turned out it was two other cops kind of initiating him and just larking about. So the cop who had the gun put to his head, his father was a more senior officer who complained, and the guys who had done it, their commanding officer was Mole, and basically Superintendent Mole took the rap for his not having his officers under control and was taken off police in Hillsborough. And David Duckenfield was put in charge, and no one liked him. He was generally disliked amongst his peers, and he was also seen as inept. And basically there's an argument that the more experienced officers who were there, and there were experienced officers policing that day, basically it was just, he's in charge, leave him to it, that attitude. And again, just in line with what was being said previously and in the context, the officer that opened the gate, his name was Marshall. I remember him in court, and he summed it up for me, and it just really does reinforce the points made. He went, well, he opened the gate, and he said, well, I was used to dealing with crowds like this. I've policed the poll tax riots and the miners' strikes. So you see the context in which it's set.
The other thing was that at the inquest, fans tried to give evidence that there had been police and stewards at the entrance to that tunnel the year before, and this was denied by the police barristers, and the coroner simply dismissed their evidence.
Even though I get that information from, I had got that information from a police inspector, a Merseyside police inspector. You see, so you know, did you want to?
Yeah. Couple of questions, but also an observation as well. Is it true that the guy that was responsible for running the video in the surveillance box was not actually called to the inquest? Secondly, I didn't know about the West Midlands Police and their role. I mean, I've had the experience of the West Midlands Police 20 years ago at a football match at a place called Fellows Park in Walsall, actually starting a riot, and I can remember that there was actually a guy that was, I think, an off-duty police officer in the crowd that day that tried to complain against them, and then withdrew the complaint after 6 months because he was getting calls at home throughout the night and everything, like quite hard-scale intimidation. But the other question really is there anything like trade unions can do to help you with affiliations and all sorts like that? 'Cause it strikes me that certainly in this city, there's a number of trade unions that would be more than happy to affiliate to your campaign and give you, any support you want, really.
Well, I think there is at the level of, I mean, and on Merseyside, it's been good. The Fire Brigade Union in particular is one that stands out. Basically, the value of it is just that, aside from raising awareness, what it does is it just ups the ante as far as I'm concerned. It gives it such a high profile. It's not just, to paraphrase, whinging scousers, because let's face it, that's the reputation we have in some parts of the press. Oh, there they go again. There was some appalling coverage in the Irish press last week that I picked up on. And yet there was brilliant stuff in some of the papers over there as well. But this, you know, sort of, you know, and you saw it all after Hillsborough, self-pity city, you know, that all of these terms come out. But what I feel is of value is that that general level of support from other people, because it is that classic thing of, you know, it's us today, it could be you tomorrow. And, you know, so I would always, and I know our group in particular, and we have spoken, you know, over the years at a lot of trade union conferences, basically to highlight, and of course lots of our members, our active members are members of, you know, the main trade unions. So yeah, I mean, and as well, the thing is, you know, we're always open to suggestions as well. I mean, we're a group, you know, of like unpaid volunteers, and we're a mix. We are a diverse mixture, great mixture of people, and that we just kind of, you know, we give of our skills, whatever we've got, when we can, and where we can, and you know, sort of just go along with the momentum. And the other thing is as well, is just how we at times shift away slightly from the campaign in terms of just the main campaign for justice. Sad to say, we've had to help a number of families over the years where they've died, and a lot of people have died, I would say, before their time, in the sense that the illnesses they've acquired, I think a lot of would be stress related. And the other sad thing is that we've had quite a number of survivors who've committed suicide. And that really, really is... I was with a woman on the day of the anniversary. She came in to see me with her daughter. And her husband was at Hillsborough. And I think it's about 2 years ago now, the daughter was 14. And she found her father hanging in the garage. And it was, you know, I mean, you know, she's got to live with that now. And it says something about the state of his mind that he would inflict that on his daughter or his wife, you know. So, you know, a lot of the time we just help in practical ways. I mean, you know, we can have all the arguments around justice, whatever, but on a daily basis, sometimes someone, you know, needs a funeral to be paid for example, you know. And so we've been able to do those things, and there is a strength. And, you know, I often think about, you know, what will happen, you know, sort of, as I said before, I think there'll be some kind of buy-off, and why it's important we make a noise at the moment is, I think that the authorities would just be quite happily dealing with the family support group, which is a group of people, well, basically 2 or 3 people, really, who don't put it out to the wider membership, can't be contacted in any way, don't rock too many boats, but are the acceptable face of it. So, so basically, our group would be seen as more radical, but basically what I think is important is that the families in our group don't lose out in any discussions and debates around what is happening at the present time. And in a perverse way, I was quite pleased that the Chief Constable rang me. I can't believe I just said that, but I said to Daniel before, the funny thing was he said to me, oh, I know you're in Bristol, and because you're at the Cube tonight, and he went, now before you get paranoid, before you get paranoid, he said, I googled your name and you come up with that, came up top. So yeah, so.
Really me out.
Yeah. Well, I said I always work on the basis there's at least 2 or 3 of you in the audience anyway, you know what I mean? So.
Can I just deal with the video question? Everyone knows that the police videos, the CCTV videos, went missing on the day. The guy in the CCTV room wasn't called to the inquest, but he was called to the Stuart Smith inquiry. And the transcript of his evidence to the Stuart Smith inquiry was that he could see the Leppings Lane ends, he could see the crush, and he could see people in trouble. When Stuart Smith asked him what he thought when he saw people climbing over the crowd, he said, I thought it was a pitch invasion. There was then further video evidence. The BBC had 6 videos, which I was not involved. I said that, you know, I'm a lawyer. I was 19 at the time, so still a law student. My first involvement as a lawyer was 10 years down the line when I acted for one of the families. and I came into possession of the 6 BBC videos, which was the BBC footage of the events. And I was told that these had been lent to the Stuart Smith inquiry and then given back to the family. And the family had never watched them, and I thought, oh God, am I really going to have to be able to watch through this? So I gave them to Nikki from the King's Cross Women's Centre and said, watch these videos, you got a picture of their son, tell me what you can see. And she rang me up and she said, well, the first video is 20 minutes footage repeated all the time, sort of highlight footage, and that's the footage currently on the Hillsborough Justice Campaign website. The other 5 videos are blank. The BBC also destroyed their footage of the events. And Stuart Smith watched those videos and wrote a report which made no mention of the fact that the BBC footage was blank videos.
Yeah, videos went missing left, right and centre. I think it was this guy and then... Did you want to? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I actually missed the very start, probably when there was an introduction, I don't know if it was covered, but I appreciate that your group are sort of voluntary as well, but I mean, how much are you able to get out and do things like this? Because I think there's tremendous support, you know, for what you're talking about amongst football supporters and people in general, more than a lot of other kind of things, you know, football divides people quite a lot, but there seems to be a lot of togetherness with this subject. And I just feel like the benefit of actually going out and meeting groups of people, you know, possibly people affiliated to particular football clubs, to make people realise, you know, that it is about them as well, that this is a common show. It's about more than one club, and there's a danger, isn't there, that it becomes the sympathy. This is, you know, it's a tragedy. Let's mourn, and then move away because it's just about liberty. It's not, you know, it is about everyone who might be put in this situation. And I mean, I'd love to think that other football clubs would be able to help get your group out to speak to them and kind of spread the word.
I think the difficulty is, one, as you say, you know, sort of we are volunteers, so there's a time factor and an economic factor. But it ebbs and flows. There's times when, like now that the interest is great, and you know, sort of the volume of emails and over the last few months, the media attention and the interviews we've done, you know, all over Europe, not with people coming to us, and sometimes that European dimension, they're prepared to say far more, and we get away with saying much more, and they don't edit it in the same way as people do here.
Yeah, BBC Bristol refused to broadcast my interview with them for this event. They said it was too controversial. I didn't say anything that I didn't say in the witness statements.
You just edit it out. I mean,
too controversial, was it?
Yeah, they said they wouldn't broadcast it.
It's so frustrating. You say something, you give an interview and you go, yes, and then you see it or you hear it, and the most banal thing you've said, they'll keep that bit in, and it's so frustrating. I did a little bit on Channel 4 last night, on Channel 4 News, just from home, and I'd said, and he said, okay, that's enough. I said, okay, as long as you get in that what I really want, and it was about this, you know, sort of evidence being released, whatever, and I said about the police, whatever, and they just said this thing I said about the families having a bad time or something, you know, something, a little platitude at the beginning as a preamble, and they kept that bit in. Moral of this is don't say them little things, but it is, we would, you know, if we're invited anywhere, we will always come along if we can, and the thing is, other clubs do, and so with that football clubs in particular, so much of our support, I brought a little postcard because it's a postcard of a banner that's made, and it's the Celtic supporters, and you know that might surprise you, but that's a postcard of a banner they had made for us, and it's absolutely it's enormous, absolutely enormous. It was outside on a car park last week before it was taken in and put on the pitch for the anniversary, and it's such, and you see, if you watch the games, you'll see it. They had it at their game on Saturday, and the support they show us and the solidarity, it is just amazing. A couple come down and regularly volunteer and help in the shop. Loads of stuff they do, and so and other clubs as well, but in particular that I'd single them out as being kind of consistent.
Yeah, there's two things. One, I just wanted to talk about my experience of Hillsborough, but also to talk about the general kind of thing about the police and the way they treat us and the way you've talked about police control. My experience of Hillsborough was my son was a Liverpool supporter, was at Liverpool University and always went to the matches. And that day I didn't know where he was, and so I identify with what you're saying about, you know, waiting for the phone call, and he wasn't there that day. And we went and laid flowers at the football ground and that afterwards, and it was, to me, it was a really moving experience of how the people of Liverpool got together, like you say, all across the divides that are in that city, you know, that they all sort of pulled together. But for me, sort of over those 20 years, and I've thought about the police's attitude, the way the police behaved that day, the cover-ups and all of that. And to me, nothing has changed. Nothing changed from before that. Nothing has changed since. You know, I was at Lewisham, and the way that the police treated us against when we were doing anti-fascist demonstrations. I was at Grunwick's, the way they treat workers who were out on picket lines. And then to bring it more up to date, I was at the G20, like David talked about, on the 1st of April, and the way the police treated us was, like you said, about like animals. You know, and they kept us penned in for hours, and I had my kids with us, and I asked to leave, and they wouldn't let us leave. Yeah. Luckily, we got out about 4 o'clock before the violence started. But you know, and the way they talked to us, we were scum. We were absolute scum. So it didn't matter why you were there. It didn't matter whether you wanted to make a peaceful protest against the finance sector and the bankers and all of that. You were all treated, just as in those days you were treated as football hooligans. Here you were treated as, you know, violent demonstrators who were about to bring the city down and that. And I think just from what Dave said, it is about, you know, sort of getting trade union support, getting community support, and getting that message out. And what I've realised is talking to people about what happened on the G20. And I think that the fact that all those videos are flying about, gone in the Guardian, it's made people talk about the police. You know, they're actually having 3 inquiries.
And you can hear the comments, can't you, on the way they're speaking to people.
Yeah, and it's all out there on Facebook, and it's on the internet. And this is kind of, you know, this is the 20th anniversary of Hillsborough, and all of a sudden it's all back in the news again. And I think it's up to all of us just to make sure that we keep up that pressure, and we affiliate to your organisation, and we keep up the pressure to make the truth come out. I agree with you. I don't think it ever will. I think the cover-ups will continue. But it's up to all of us to just keep up that pressure.
Just one other point is just as well, that, you know, that they just rub salt into the wounds. One of the officers, who was a South Yorkshire police officer who had been involved in after Hillsborough, was made Chief Constable of Merseyside, Norman Betterson, and we campaigned, and I think over the course of a weekend, I think we got 25,000 signatures just in the city centre over 2 days, and then we protested at the police authority, and then we sat in at the police authority at the meeting that was, you know, to appoint him. And I mean, they were very nice. They made us tea and sandwiches, sent out for sandwiches and everything. You know, you didn't want them to be nice to you. It was worse when they're nice, isn't it? You know? But and it didn't stop him being appointed. But nevertheless, what it did again was keep in the media attention. This is what they do to people. And you know, you have to look at Merseyside Police Authority for doing that as well, which I think highlights the point that, you know, you're not picking off a particular force, although in the case of some like West Midlands, you can justifiably do that. This is the police as an organisation, and, you know, just substitute one for the other. So it's good.
Personally, can I just say thank you so much for obviously sharing your views and everything. I don't think you've got to clap up. I think what it's done personally is, although I think I've read Phil Scrapton's book on Hillsborough, you know, watched it last Wednesday when it was on the History Channel, and watched Hillsborough. I think when it was on in 1997 it was on first. I remember watching it again recently on the Wednesday. And it's really just contextualised, obviously, how, you know, when you're speaking there, certainly some of the sort of the political issues that, you know, just by reading the book didn't seem that, you know, sort of obvious. For my thing, first of all, I think I was 7 when Hillsborough happened. I wasn't really, to be honest, I'm completely unaware of anything of the day, but like my dad said, I mean, we've had opportunities to go to Liverpool sort of 2 or 3 times a season, but actually I tend to go to Bristol City a lot. And personally for me, the most important point of all of this is actually, had that been a semi-final of Bristol City, and, you know, it was sort of 10 years ago. But had it been sort of 10 years ago or whenever, I would have been there with my friends. Yeah. And actually, for a situation like that, to someone to say, you know, this awful incident's happened, and yet, you know, you've tried your best to, you know, do something about it, and actually you've killed your friends, and something like that really sort of brings it home, and it's that level of sort of, you know, just awfulness, you know, because I would have been there if had it been a semi-final, and unrealistically as it may be, but, you know, I would have been there. That could quite simply, you know, have been me. And I think really that's where you know, from my side, I can really feel, you know, the pain, because that will never go away. The day after, on a Tuesday or whether it was a Monday, that sort of pain will never really. I can't imagine it would ever be diminished. I don't know. I can't imagine what it must feel like. So from that side, personally, I can see that that's why you can never really stop campaigning because of that. And whatever the truth may come out after or anything like that, there's still that simple concept of actually, in the worst possible time for anything to have happened, you had those sort of lies being spread, about you. The second thing is, if you don't mind me sort of asking, obviously you sharing, what do you feel personally and on behalf of the families is the main part, if anything, that could come out? Would you want to come out from, or is that a hard question? I don't
well, I think what I would want to come out won't come out, which is that, sort of the selective nature of the evidence. But I think I know what some people are saying in Liverpool is that they want the meeting between Margaret Thatcher and the police to come out. Which, see, Thatcher was up there right away. Thatcher and Colin Moynihan. Well, and I can remember survivors who were in hospital. God love me, he's dead now, the guy, but telling her where to go. So don't come near my bed. It's bad enough being injured without you turning up. How sensitive. You're stuck there. Yeah, you're stuck in hospital. You've just got away with your life, and Margaret Thatcher comes to but sort of basically in the hope that would, what people are saying is that would show the level of, sort of the beginnings of the cover-up. But what I would really like just brought out in some public forum, apart from what we've brought out, what I would want, if you're asking me, and I think the most you'd get at some point, is a ruling that there was an injustice, that would not be the wording, but that it was unfair what happened, it was wrong what happened, there was an inadequacy in terms of the inquiry, and the whole inquiry was flawed. And I was sort of hoping that might come through Europe. I've never held Europe out there as some panacea of all ills, but nevertheless, some of the stuff I gave to the barrister acting for Anne Williams was around a precedent with 3 Irish guys and an inquest case, which the case had gone to Europe, and the argument was they had not received a fair hearing. And an adequacy of procedure, and that was incorporated into what Anne submitted, and I was hoping that they might just get onto that because that was a precedent. But anyway, it wasn't that they didn't get onto it, they just said the thing was out of time, But I do think what the first point you made around living with that is, and going back to what you experienced at West Ham, that total lack of control over your movements when, and then to subsequently survive. So the reality is you're standing on people. There's a horrible reality in some cases, and some of the stories I know, where people, sort of they knew there was someone underneath them, but if they moved to try and help them, they go under, and who of us knows what we would do unless we've been in that situation. So in that respect, I always argue that survivors are the forgotten victims of Hillsborough, because the torment they live with.
Yeah. I'd like to see 3 things come out of investigation. The first is the acknowledgement that not only did the police cause the deaths of these people, but they acted to prevent the rescue of these people. The second thing is that even while people were dying on the pitch, the police had already started to pervert the course of justice. That they immediately lied to the press and said the fans broke down the gates, that they destroyed the video evidence, that they lied about the fans being drunk and fighting, and that this was occurring when they should have been rescuing the fans. And the third thing I'd like to come out is a recognition of the bravery of the fans who confronted the police, who fought the police back time and time again across that pitch to carry out rescue attempts, as futile as they may have been without medical treatment and medical equipment and trained medical personnel. But this continued for a good 45-50 minutes. I mean, I left after 45 minutes, so I can't say what happened beyond that time. But just constantly across the pitch, young people were confronting large numbers of policemen and forcing them back, not through fighting, but just by shouting and arguing and sheer force, of verbal force. And that went on across the pitch I'd like to see that as the third thing recognised.
Just quickly, there's you mentioned about police, you know, on horseback, and you said as well, the first response to the emerging disaster was not to send for ambulances, it was to send for dog handlers. They sent for police with dogs. And the other thing is that, I mean, just in terms of, you know, so there was a guy lived rough in Liverpool, and he wasn't that old, and I remember him, he was aggressive, and I used to avoid him because because one night he'd actually grabbed me by, he asked me for money, I said no, he grabbed me by sort of round my neck, and I found him really intimidating. And anyway, so I was kind of, get off me, whatever. And then there was always something familiar about him, just in all that. And I was looking over old video footage, and I saw this young, fresh-faced kid with a massive curly hair. And the next time I saw this lad on the street, I said, "Excuse me, were you at Hillsborough?" And he went to me, "Yeah, why?" I said, "Did you speak to a camera? Do you remember speaking to a camera?" And he went, "Yeah, girl, I was showing them my old ticket because no one had asked me to, you know, no one had taken me ticket off me." And he said, "Yeah," and he named his mates, one of whom was Dave Church's son. And he said, "Yeah, so my mates died, so and so, so and so, so and so." And he was a drug addict on the streets, and he said, "Didn't used to be like this, girl," you know, and his whole thing. And that to me just really, really, you know, sort of the knock-on effect. I mean, okay, it could happen to anyone, it might have happened to him anyway, but I think he might have been helped along the way. It was just so sad, from this fresh-faced kid I saw on camera to this guy on the streets, aggressive and someone you avoided. It's terrible, but it's true. And I just think it's really important that, you know, sort of those things are acknowledged.
Last week there was a film on ITV3, Hillsborough.
The Jimmy McGovern documentary, drama.
Was that how it was?
Well,
Are
you know,
happy with that?
No, well,
because you had Ricky Tomlinson as well.
Yeah.
And I know what Ricky thinks of Maggie Thatcher at the time, because he went through the minors.
I personally, I mean, I'm always going to be more critical because of my own involvement.
Sure,
and I have personal reasons for not being too happy with Jimmy McGovern on that first. But anyway, leaving that aside, I think it generally did open things up because it had mass viewing, and it really did raise the issue.
Yes.
What he did was what I didn't like. He sensationalised the inquest bit in ways that I didn't like. But that's you know, it's licence, isn't it? And you know, that's what people do in a drama. But what it did was get a lot of the facts out. He actually used my inquest, the stuff I'd written around the inquest, a draft copy of that for the initial proposal to get through to Grenada. And I just think it did do a job. You couldn't deny it did a job. He was selective a bit with the families he used as well, but that was how he got it through all the various whatever. And, you know, I'm never going to be totally happy because they're never going to say, because what I want to say is never going to get on the telly, full stop, you know.
Well, my girlfriend was watching it, you know, down South Way, and you know, through me, she's you know, over the years become a Liverpool supporter and watches all the games and this, that, and the other. But when that was on, the Hillsborough thing, and from when it was televised on Sky, it was on Sky at lunchtime, the service.
Yeah.
She sat all the way through the service, hardly ever moved, and she watched the film. And the film on the night time, she lit 2 candles and put them there for the you know, for the fans who died. And she broke down crying, and that's how much it got home to her. Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
That's gone through a lot of people.
Yeah, but what my problem is a little bit just with the 20 years thing is that the length of time is important because, and more people are now prepared to put things on the television, whatever, I don't mean that drama, but other things, and there was high profile over 20 years because it's seen as consigned to history, and more people are prepared to say sorry now because there'll be no legal consequences because they're saying sorry for whatever. And I just think what sums Hillsborough up for me, and it was actually a Catholic priest who told me this from Rotherham, who I interviewed in the very early days after Hillsborough, and he had been there, and he was in the gymnasium, which was the temporary mortuary, and he said he was going round, you know, seeing the dead and whatever, and he said at 5 o'clock in the gymnasium at the Hillsborough ground, there was row after row of dead body, and all around the gymnasium walls were police officers eating Kentucky Fried Chicken. And the person I worked with on the radical professor wouldn't let me write that just plainly in the first report. He went, well, they must have been hungry. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I think my appetite might have gone a little bit. So can just, because that man there and that woman
sure,
there, that's right.
Just a couple of things I want to do about the political background to it, because I lived in Liverpool in the 60s and 70s, and you have to explain that the actual hatred, particularly by the son of Liverpool as a town, because the class resistance, the level of class struggle in Liverpool was utterly different from anywhere else in the country. I remember the Liverpool Trades Council was almost like a Soviet, massive rent strike, massive, you name it, the resistance was in Liverpool, and they developed amongst certainly both Labour and the Tories and the Tory press this hatred of all things Liverpudlian and determination to smash the city, which they did in the end. They destroyed its industrial base, everything away. But the other thing I want to mention is the consequences of Hillsborough. Oh, sorry, just another thing beforehand. The irony of it is that in actual fact Liverpool supporters didn't have a reputation for hooliganism. There was the Heysel Stadium thing, but generally in terms of trouble at football matches you wouldn't get them. Because I remember, you know, going to see Liverpool a lot, you wouldn't get trouble with Liverpool supporters. They weren't the great hooligan team. West Ham were, but not Liverpool. But it's the consequences for football, because as part, again, I think it's a class issue. Football's been taken away from the working class. All-seater stadiums, pricing people out of being able to watch football. They've used it as an excuse, not because they're interested in crowd, in safety and all the rest of it, but it's, if you like, the bourgeoisification of football. It's they're taking over of it by business, you know, charging 20, God knows how much. I mean, it's impossible for the average Liverpudlian now probably to go and see Liverpool. Because it's difficult to get a ticket and because of the price of it. Yeah, I remember being on the Kop, you know, with 24,000 people on the Kop, never mind in the rest of the of the stadium. And that's one of the other tragedies of Hillsborough. Not just the personal tragedies of the families, but how they've used it as an excuse to destroy a working class activity. Masses of working people get together to enjoy themselves in a crowd collectively.
Yeah, very sound points made there. I totally agree with that. But just say, if Liverpool sports has a reputation for anything, it was for stealing. And just with a more topical point on that, after the Chelsea game last week, and coupling that with the hatred of the sun, there's a picture on, I forget where I saw it on something, but they were on one of the service stations on the way back where the next day's sun was out. So they just robbed them all and there was a ceremonial burning in the it's great to just see it, you know. Direct action, you can't beat it, can you? So
we parked our car one of the matches not far from the ground. Do you remember, Sam?
Can we sorry, there's a few other people who are ahead of you.
Yeah, I was 11 when Hillsborough happened, and I would say, anyone who knew me in the late 80s would say, they would look at me and say nothing meant more to me than Liverpool Football Club. It was everything when I was that age, and they were everything. And I remember me and my dad talking about whether or not we were going to go, and then I can't remember why we didn't go, but we didn't go. And I really feel that it affected me profoundly. I made a scrapbook, age 11, like all these press cuttings, and I think the one thing that's come out, I've read a lot, and a lot of what you've spoken about I knew, but I've learned new things tonight. But the main feeling I get is just a sense of powerlessness, because I talk to people about Hillsborough, you know, if I get pissed in the pub, I'll go on a big lecture about the, you know, inadequacies of the police on that day. And people still go, oh, was that the one where like all the fans got drunk and arrived late and pushed? Like even now, it's mud sticks from the sun.
That's
People
right.
will always believe what they read. What can the average person like me, who feels strongly about it, what can the average person do?
I think what you can do is, and you know, I direct people to our website, because what I tried to do in writing the history of Hillsborough on that was to just say it was the truth that, you know, and it's a bit warts and all really, but it does, and I really wanted to update it for the anniversary, but just the sheer pressure of everything else, I haven't. It's just got, but basically the history of Hillsborough, what happened from day one, is on there. So I just think, you know, you direct them to there, and basically just, you know, try to put paid to the lives that way, basically through saying, well, that wasn't the case, because I don't know what else you can do, especially if people have, you know, sort of a blind spot around, you know, they want to believe something, you know. And you can imagine, you know, the hurt every time things are churned out again. You know, imagine, you know, how families feel and how survivors feel, you know, it's just, it's horrible, it really is. And it's very frustrating because, you know, you just all the time. But as well, the other thing is just that I brought some down and left them. Some of them you might have picked them up. Some people, and I don't really know them, they're just off some of the football forums. So what they've done is, through stuff that I've done and other people have done, they put together just a sheet which could be downloaded off the internet, and then someone gave them a bit of money before the anniversary, and they put it together, and it's just context and consequences, and there's a timeline in the back, and it refers you to other reading around it, and it's basically, you know, sort of how it was perceived. Just, it's very brief, this, and I left them, they're free. What I will do is, because I didn't bring that many, what I'll do is, I don't know if you want to take a copy of them, if you haven't seen it. What I'll do is I'll get some sent down here as well. Just give them out, you know, I mean, they are, we've given that many of them out. But I'll get more and I'll send them if you want. Yes, it's just little things like that, I think. That's quite heartening, you know, when that happens, when you can link up like that with other groups, other clubs, and especially when there's that distance, you know, and people still show that they care.
Gentleman there, then the gentleman there.
I was just going to say actually that it's reiterating David's point that here that was saying about perhaps the police haven't changed and they, you know, still the same. And in fact there's two instances that I can think of recently when we beat Birmingham City 7-0. We were kept outside the ground for 30 minutes. We missed 3 goals and the police were mocking us every time a goal was scored. They were saying, oh, there's the goal you've missed. And I just was totally amazed, thinking, well, my mates were at Hillsborough, and it was my 21st, and my sister couldn't get a second ticket, and that's why I didn't go. And I just was totally amazed that for an FA Cup quarter-final, that they actually did that. I totally forgot, because I actually thought it kind of kicked off. We're hearing it, because obviously the technology has changed, people getting it through mobile phones and stuff, and getting the goals coming through. And I was amazed that that game still kicked off. Yeah. When for half an hour we were still outside. But also, more recently, the following year, we went to Athens and we were tear gassed with tickets. Yeah. And there were literally 5-year-old girl by us, an 8-year-old lad by us, and we were tear gassed. I've never been tear gassed before, and hopefully never again in my life. And it causes real anger. You can see people in amongst a whole crowd of people get hit by it. It just causes you really wanting to, you almost want to kill someone. You don't know what.
By all accounts, Athens was very badly organised. I mean, generally,
and when we went in, it was a massive crush. And the only thing that we were thinking of for the first half, where we were behind the goal, was thinking, well, so remember Hillsborough, and everyone was saying that, and we were just so placid for that first half, purely because the fact we were.
I know quite a few people who had tickets who never got in at all. They'd gone all the way to Athens and didn't get in at all. And the other thing, where you're saying you were kept outside at that game, this policy of keeping people inside, which always used to happen, that containment of, you know, not, I mean, it just raised, you're there and you're not allowed out. I mean, again, I use the analogy, you know, if it happened somewhere else in another arena, you know, a theatre, or, you know, someone used the analogy the other day, horse racing, Ascot, you know.
On a lighter note, though, just to finish up what I was going to ask the question of, because of obviously Everton beat Scum yesterday, is there a sort of positive rapport in Liverpool that perhaps Everton will actually bring back the cup on the 20th anniversary?
Well, the thing was, yesterday at the ground, at the Everton game, there were several banners calling for justice for the 96. And you know, I mean, that rivalry between, I have to say, I come from a family of Evertonians. I have a cousin who's a former captain of Everton, and I've always been a Liverpool. I was the only one with foresight and intellect, you know. But see, and you know, sort of, Everton were a better team at the time when I supported them as a child. But so the point is, I know that rivalry, but this transcends the thing, and I think that, you know, sort of most people I know wanted Everton to win yesterday. There'll be no love lost when they win it. I mean, you know, there's the usual stuff, but, you know, what a choice.
Yeah, the 89 final after Hillsborough was between Liverpool and Everton. And my greatest memory of that match is 80,000 people, Everton and Liverpool fans combined, drowning out the national anthem by singing Merseyside. Reminds me when Andy Burnham was drowned out the other day. Very similar thing, just spontaneous, not plans, but very powerful.
Shall we just take a question from this gentleman who's been waiting a long time?
I was wondering if the Justice campaign received, what sort of support it received, if any, from the players at the time?
Well, the Justice campaign wasn't in existence at the time, but at the time of the disaster, immediately after, the players were very good in attending funerals, and the club in sending the players, etc. And some, you know, went to more funerals than others did, and there was that support. But over time, and it shames me to say it, that when it gets what they deem to be political, the pull back the players, they're told to have nothing to do. And I have to say, you know, we're neighbours, our campaigners' neighbours, were right opposite the ground, you know, we're right opposite the COP. And we have footballs from everywhere, you know, signed footballs. And the only one we don't have is a Liverpool one. Liverpool never said, they don't acknowledge us, they just acknowledge the family support group. Even though every home game, the ground is just full of Liverpool supporters with our badges, our banners they've made supporting us. It's a bizarre situation. But the whole thing is, it's deemed to be political. But I have to say, in terms of the support we get, there is one person who does give us support more than anyone else, and it's Jamie Carragher. The support we have, we can send anything to Jamie to be signed, to auction, whatever, and it's back the next day. He just is basically, you know, sort of, he never really wants to be up, you know, sort of on the platform. He just wants to be amongst his mates, and he really is a good supporter of our group.
Was it kind of was it on the way that the thing of the crushing against the wire fences? I mean, how long were wire fences in place, and were there examples of very near incidents leading up to Hillsborough?
That's probably a question for David,
First wire fences were put up by our old friend Mr. Ken Bates in about I think he went through about 85, 86. So you've got, by the end of the 80s, you've got a lot of football stadiums with the big wires up to separate the crowd from the pitch. So you've got about 5 or 6 years of that. I mean, interestingly, in comparison to Greece, they do the same thing in Greece to this day, but it's very thin netting, mainly to stop kind of missiles. Greek crowds do have a tendency to throw missiles on the pitch. But this was actually, you know, if you actually look at the wire, you know, this is serious fencing. This is like Guantanamo Bay job. I mean, and Ken Bates actually, I think, originally wanted to have it electrified fences was the original plan.
He forgot about that, didn't he?
Yes, well, amongst many things that Mr. Bates has managed to forget over the years.
And were there near crushings before?
Well, I mean, you know, there have been enormous numbers of...
2 years before at Hillsborough there was a crush, and a whole load of fans had to climb over the top onto the pitch.
1946. I mean, the thing is that this has been going on for 100 years. 1946, Bolton, 43 people dead, completely eradicated from most conventional histories, totally forgotten. I mean, it's, you know... Ibrox 1971, massive crush on the stairs, over 30 people killed. 1902, Ibrox, collapse of a wooden stand, over 100 killed.
Bradford fire.
Bradford Fire 85. So in the UK, you've had a number of incidents.
And there'd been government reports. I mean, Popplewell reported on the state of, football grounds after Bradford, and yet nothing's implemented. There's no changes implemented. It was only after Hillsborough and Taylor.
Well, you have changes, but it's all about policing. It's all about treating football fans and football crowds, as the enemy. I mean, lessons were learned and implemented, but they were all learnt from policing the miners' strike and equivalent industrial disputes of the early 1980s. So you did have wires beforehand. You did have changes in policing, and all pretty much uniformly negative. Prior to Hillsborough. Roger.
Yeah. Well, I just want to come on to one thing. I've heard a bit about, just quickly on one of the phone-ins I heard this week. One Tottenham fan phoned in and said, and he did not know about the tunnel business. Right? He phoned in, he was on the phone, and he talked about being at a game. I can't remember. We're still trying to track down which game it was. I think it was against Wolves or something.
Yes, Wolves.
Yeah, that's right. And he said that the same thing had happened. Right? He said there's a horrible tunnel he went about, because most people don't know about the tunnel. I don't even know about the dam. But most people don't know about this tunnel. And he said, I was pushed in this tunnel by police on horseback, and we were crushed. And he said, and we all popped out the other end, like that. And he said, and it was absolutely frightening. He said, there were loads of complaints on the day, nothing was done. It was all ignored. So clearly it was not only were the policing and the design of the ground was a joke. I mean, that tunnel was a nightmare. The whole thing was designed. The other thing I got pissed off about this week was the BBC's continual go on about terracing. It became the whole debate, as far as I could tell, the BBC became about terracing by the end of the week. And there was the only decent, people were arguing about it, but one person came in and said, who was a stadium designer, I don't know if you heard him on Radio 5, and he came and said, well, yeah, but what's the problem? Terracing in Germany is designed properly, and it's all, things are done right. It's actually less dangerous to have terracing than it is to have seats where everyone stands up. He's going, this whole argument got diverted about Hillsborough.
We get asked about that an awful lot, and even within our group there's differences of opinion. My own argument is standing never killed anyone. It's the surrounding circumstance, situation around pens and stuff, and yet other people will disagree with me on that. And that was why I was a little bit annoyed with the service on Wednesday, was that got hijacked a bit, and a lot of the survivors weren't too happy that it become a little bit of a lecture against standing at football grounds.
To add to that, internationally, if you take the evidence, no disaster is caused merely by the existence of terracing, even inadequate terracing. In almost every case I can think of, there are other factors. The worst football disaster on record is Peru, 1964, 463 people die in a crush. And why did it happen? Because they fired tear gas into the crowd. It's not about terracing, or similarly, the Luzhniki in the Soviet Union, 1981, 210 people die, on a terrace. But then why are you allowing a massive crowd to go onto a terrace that's got kind of 5 or 6 inches of ice and has turned basically, into a kind of ski slope, So, and if you want cover-ups, that's the cover-up of all time. The Soviet authorities, saying 2-3 people dead basically the next day, still haven't fully admitted it. So I do think the standing thing is a complete red herring. And my experience of standing on giant terraces with quite wild crowds is actually there is an incredible degree of self-regulation amongst most crowds, particularly where you have long-established traditions of people standing in those stadiums operating as a crowd. And it's actually almost invariably external interventions of one kind or another that generate chaos in those crowds. Once you start panicking people, or similarly in Ghana, 2001 in Accra, 250 people die at the big Ghana derby. And again, tear gas. You start firing tear gas, people panic, and you've got locked gates. In those cases, they're actually locking the gates, that people have come into. When people try and get out to get away from the tear gas, they end up in corridors and everybody piles behind them. The same thing happened at River Plate in Argentina in 1968. The Olympiacos deaths, which I think was 1981, same thing. tear gas. I mean, what is anybody doing, anywhere, under any circumstances, firing tear gas into a football crowd? I don't care what level of disorder's going on. What are you doing firing tear gas? I mean, it is absolutely beyond the pale of any kind of reason to be doing that. So I do think, the standing issue is, it's a terrible diversion from the real issues.
The point you make about self-regulation is just I went to watch Liverpool from I was 7, and I started off with my friend that didn't live too far from the ground, and we just used to walk up, 2 little girls going the mat. You can't imagine it now, can you? 2 7-year-olds, and we used to go in what was known as the boys' pen. And a friend of mine is, he writes poetry and stuff, and he wrote this thing, and I used to say girls used to go in there as well, because there was never any mention of that. But by the time we were 11, we'd progressed to the cop, and the size, someone they were saying, the number of people on the cop, and I can remember, there's the sway forward when there's a goal and you come back, and I lost my shoe, and I was quite shy, and I wouldn't ask anyone or anything, and so I was like, I just have to go home, and my mum will batter me basically because I'm going home with one shoe on. And someone at the front shouted, "There's a shoe," and I just took this man next to me and said, "You know what, that's mine." And they went, and they just passed my shoe back up. And what people used to do, going, "Hey, there's 2 little girls here," and they'd sort of form this little thing around. You were always safe. It wasn't that my mother didn't care about you. You were quite safe.
Football grounds anywhere else. I saw City Coventry match. I felt completely safe with sort of like 20,000 people there.
Yeah, it's those other circumstances that you just said. Yeah.
I've left him on the cop when I've gone to the toilet, and somebody's looking after him. Cheers.
Yeah.
Gentleman at the back.
I've sort of seen on your website about the resistance you had from the original supporters. Blocking your website launch and such. Discuss questions. Other things that they've done, and why did they do that?
It's really so sad, but basically, yes. I mean, when I said before about being in court and getting threatened with imprisonment, the really sad thing was you had this awful situation of 2 bereaved fathers and survivor there being threatened with imprisonment by other bereaved families, and you go, what's happened here when, and different agendas and different influences around people advising them, and I never want to go down that road of kind of being overtly critical, but I do think the truth, and again, I think when we were going up to Leeds just to be there when those private prosecutions were going on, and again, this is on the website, I was travelling up with families who were in the family support group, and they were just travelling back and forth every day from Leeds, because they couldn't afford to stay. And basically, the committee was staying in the Hilton Hotel. And when they stayed over because there was the jury was out and wherever, they were given a few pounds to find a B&B. And we actually give them money from our group. We didn't have much money in the group. And basically, we never had any money. But basically, those sorts of differences just really became very deeply entrenched. Where if you were going to London, if they were going down to London, they'd go down first class, and the other families would be on coaches. And it's class. It's class. Bottom line, it's class. And I've seen it. It's horrible, And I used to see it physically happen at meetings with the solicitors and the barristers and the steering committee of solicitors. I saw it in Manchester Town Hall, and I was sitting down there with all the families, and the chair of the steering committee of solicitors said to the chair of the family support group, "Oh, don't speak from down there, come up here." And the symbolism was great, come up amongst us, you're one of us. And it sounds over, and there's another arena for analyse and all that, but it's, because I can put sort of my objective head on and I can analyse it all. It's very sad.
Position is that you take who you think are the head people and you separate them up from the group. So I think it was, yes, there is class differences between a couple of the families in the support group and Justice Campaign, but it's because they were of a similar class to the people they're opposing that it was easier for them to be co-opted, whereas they were never going to co-opt some of the families from Liverpool too and from Seaforth and areas like that, just because they didn't have enough in common with them. But they saw the opportunity to co-opt. I mean, it's particularly the Hicks family is the obvious one. They saw the opportunity that these are people who are more like this. We can bring them in, we can separate them off from the group, and we can damage the campaign by doing so.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Do you still get problems today?
Yes, yeah, we do. At various levels, it still exists today, and you know, to be honest, you grow weary because you go, oh look, you know, because the thing is, you can anticipate it. You know, you've been around so long, you can anticipate where it's going to come from and what it's going to be and whatever. And that's why the point I made before is I'm really, I've had to do a few battles in the last week because the City Council, the Lord Mayor, decided to give the bereaved families the freedom of the city, so they can now all walk the sheep around Liverpool, you know, basically. But then I was getting communications from families who were going, can you tell me how I can get into Anfield for the memorial? I don't know how to get in. And what's this about the freedom of the city? So I contacted the Lord Mayor's office and I found out that they were just working off a list that Trevor Hicks had given them. And and so I basically was then giving them other people's, you know, names and addresses. And I was saying, you're leaving these people off. They haven't been invited. And basically, at the day of the memorial, I received an email in the morning from an out-of-town family, and it was really quite nasty, but I didn't blame them because, you know, they were directing it at us, the wrong people. But I wrote, and I went, yeah, look, and I got onto the Lord Mayor, and I said, you sort it out today. But the family hadn't left a phone number, it was just an email. They didn't know anything about it, and they were really, really hurt. And I have to say, one of the families that Daniel dealt with in the past, Dave Church, if I was going to put my money on one person, I knew there'd be one. Dave told the Lord Mayor what he could do with his freedom of the city. So I was just so proud of him. But basically, yes, and the song that was released, the Fields of, you know, it's a take on the Fields of Athenry, the Fields of Anfield Road, which, you know, sort of brought in ageing rock stars from Liverpool. To do the career no harm, and it was the Lord Mayor's idea, and we were left out the loop totally with that, weren't invited to any of it, and all the funds raised go to the family support group, so you learn to live with it. The way we made money, it sounds, we had no money at all. The first little body of money we got, and I'll be very quick with this, was just FHM magazine in Australia said stuff about Hillsborough and the fans, which was very detrimental, and we liaised with them about it, and they said what could they do, and make a donation, and they gave us 15,000. Well, they said 5, but I got them to 15, and so we ended up with £15,000. And then someone, and I'd like to claim credit for this where I can't, someone, and I think it's someone, I think it was a guy from Coleraine, someone I knew anyway, who had the idea about, you know, like, I think it was Lance Armstrong, you know, the yellow wristband Lance Armstrong thing. Why don't you put them with your, you know, Justice for 96 or whatever, and your website on? Oh, give it a go, you know, get 1,000. My God, we are still selling those wristbands at £1 a go. It was like people were selling them on eBay. It was awful, actually. They were buying them off us for £1, or people, you know the way they do, they still latch onto it. So we had to, but then it was great because fans were seeing them on eBay and putting bids in for £1,000 for this pound wristband, and just rubbishing the people who were putting them on to make money. And we made money and you know, we've used that money for funerals, for people, for you know, like when the guy committed suicide, they were losing the house, everything. So we used the money. And Michael Shields, the lad who's still in prison, who was arrested in Bulgaria, and you know is clearly innocent because the guy who did it confessed, whatever. In the early days, we sorted, because they didn't have that expertise around running a campaign. Why could they? Just, you know, an ordinary working class family whose kid never come back from watching Liverpool in Istanbul, and so basically we did stuff for them. We helped their campaign out. So we do things like that. And just as well, just another thing is that when I talk about survivors, the other thing that our group, I believe, has given them is a focal point where they feel people are listening. And it got to the stage where, you know, some of them started writing poems and stuff, and they were putting them on the football forums. And one guy in particular said, let's put them together. And you know, they got it to this, which is, you know, a book, you know, which it's sold in aid of our campaign. But basically for me, I wrote the foreword to it, it's just a little brief foreword. But for me, why I wanted to support it, and the group did, was because it just was, you know, your average fan, a survivor of Hillsborough, general supporter, who was able to put stuff down and put their experiences or their emotions down on paper, and then someone else, another fan, got it to that. And, you know, just little things like that. And I just brought these as examples for you. These two guys, you know, both are Hillsborough. We've lent them the money basically to publish this a few years ago, and it come back to us threefold. And both of them now are very successful playwrights. They've got a fourth run of a play which sells out for, I think it's 6 weeks at a time. That's a big theatre in Liverpool called Brick Up the Mersey Tunnel. And Nicky, one of the guys, he's got a play on in July in Liverpool at the Empire, which is the major theatre. Well, One Night in Istanbul, which is a take on what happened in Istanbul with a Liverpool twist and someone trying to flog Hitler's cufflinks. It's a great story because it's based on someone, whether it's an urban myth or whatever, but it's about someone who had Hitler's cufflinks and then tried to sell them. So that's yeah. So you see that, you know, there's a lot of positive stuff, and it's away from the basic thing. But the more these people, and the thing with these people, the more they become well known for stuff they do, they never fail to actually say around the Hillsborough issue and support it, so that, you know, it moves on. And as I say, this other booklet, which is just totally factual, what I'll do is I'll make sure that I'll get some sent here for people, because I think there was only about 10 tonight.
I have a sense that people would like to have a drink.
I'd love one.
Well, just to say then, just to sort of close matters, to thank Sheila and Daniel very much, and to thank all of you for coming and sharing your memories and your thoughts with us. It's much appreciated. And just a very, very big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just lastly, before we go, if you want to hear more about Radical History events, just grab one of our flyers off the table out there. But thanks ever so much for coming.